I'm supposed to talk about these things in an effort to somehow deal with uh, issues I have concerning grief. Um, I know it sounds a lot worse than it really is, but apparently those who know me think it's something that in my nature that I tend to not deal with things that I push things aside or I compartmentalize with a lot of a lot of ability to do so. But yeah, so yeah, sure. Let's get into it then. Um, it's June 16th, 2020. We are about 5 days from Father's Day, and I really don't know what to do about that. Um, Caught myself getting a little bit choked up walking through a grocery store a few weeks back when I passed by the card section and I saw that there were Father's Day cards, and for more than one reason. For those of you who have been around the channel for a while, know that I lost my father 2 years ago. He had a battle with cancer that lasted a long time. Um, Also, just in general, Bailey and I aren't as close as we used to be. There's other issues there. She has some things that she's going through personally, and it's just been, and with everything that's been going on, we really haven't been spending a lot of time together. We still see each other, you know, somewhat frequently. I was only seeing her on the weekends every week on the weekends because uh, her mother and I are divorced. But with COVID and with everything else that I've just referenced to, we don't have that weekend arrangement right now, and there's a lot of things going on. I mean, I could spin a lot of reasons for why, but the long and the short of it is that we have a somewhat different relationship at times. Um, and I think I need to get into that as well as I need to get into the issues with with why I don't know what to do about Father's Day. But we'll get there. And of course, because I can't just do this in a normal fashion on a face cam or anything like that, because I don't do those things. Of course, we're playing a game in the background, and I'm not exactly sure which game it will be. I know that there was an update to No Man's Sky, which means it might be that in the background. I don't know. It seems sort of fitting as we're talking about the great beyond. But we'll see. So, yeah, let's go there. As I said, those of you know, my father died 2 years ago, and I'll get into more specifics about it in a little bit. But let's go back a ways. I was the youngest of three children. My brother is 7 years older than I am. He's in his 50s. My sister is 10 years older than me, so she's 10 years older than I am, and I'm in my 40s, so she's in her 50s as well. We grew up at a time where we didn't have a lot, but we didn't go without. My father was a farm boy growing up. He grew up on a farm in southwestern PA. He and his brother lived there with their parents. My cousin, my uncle's daughter, and her family live on the farm now in the farmhouse that he grew up in. And they are, living the dream, just carrying on the tradition that my dad and my uncle grew up with. But my father did not go to college. He graduated high school. He got a job working for a hardware store. He drove for a small hardware store out in southwestern PA in a small town, in the pretty rural area, pretty about southeast of Pittsburgh. I'm sorry. And he lived there until he met my mom, and they got married in 1963. And they lived above where my dad worked for a few years until they had my sister, and then eventually they moved. So there, my mom and my father and my baby sister, well, my oldest sister, but she was the baby at the time, lived above the store where my dad worked. And eventually he got a job working for an insurance agency. He became an insurance agent. Now, he had a couple other jobs in between that, and he did a couple other things that I didn't know about, and that just kind of goes into this entire narrative of things that I don't know, things that I thought I knew. He worked with at-risk youth to try to get them back on the street. And this is something I didn't know about the man, and I didn't find that out until I read his obituary. It goes to show you. But to put it into context, if you know somebody who grew up in a family on a farm, or grew up in a rural area, or grew up in a farm with a big family, the one that's to have like 5 or 6, 7 kids, and the youngest being, like, say in their, in diapers, and the oldest being off in her 20s, and it's just there's such a huge age difference between the youngest and the oldest, and when it starts out like the family, the father, they have the child, and the father sort of takes him under his wing, and he gets him out in the field working with them, and then the next one comes along, and then it gets to a point where the father's a little bit more older and doesn't have as much ability to relate or to interact with that child. Well, kind of had the same thing in my family. Both my brother and my sister being born in the 60s when my father was only in his 20s, they had a more they had a closer relationship. I mean, looking back through pictures of my family, you will see more pictures of either of them with him doing something than you will see of me doing something with him. I am usually in pictures with everybody, or in pictures with my brother and my sister doing stuff, but it's not a lot of times you will see me with him. And the funny thing is that for the longest time I have kind of closely thought of myself as a close in comparison of our personalities and how we act and how we think. I think that I got a lot of the traits that my father possessed. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. The man was quick with a joke. I mean, he was just he had such a rapier-like wit that you never knew whether he was being serious about things. I mean, the man would sit there and tell a story that you were convinced, because the man was very knowledgeable despite having a college education. He was very knowledgeable about everything. He used to kick our ass in Trivial Pursuit. Not because I was a kid and just didn't know anything, but no, he just knew everything. He read. He was a voracious reader. He read, he had a subscription to National Geographic. He knew things about all over the world, and Audubon Society, and books, and mechanical things, and engineering things. He just knew a lot of information. So he's very knowledgeable, and he just would tell a story, and it would go on and on and on and on, and you'd think that this is some great, narrative about a lost civilization or something other than that, or just something newsworthy, and then it would just like turn at the last second into a punchline, and you're just like, oh, I cannot believe we fell for that. To the point where when I was in my teens, we started to question everything my father said. Is like, okay, how is this going to end? Is this going to be a true story, or is it going to be a joke? I've done some of the same things. He is better at telling stories than I am. He gets to the point quicker than I do. Anybody will tell you that. This video is probably going to be very, proof positive of that fact. But I honestly didn't know the man. So when I came along in the 70s, and he was in his 30s, there just wasn't really. I mean, there was interaction between the two of us, and I don't remember the more formative, years of my toddler, childhood. I didn't remember those things, but I'm sure that they had that. I'm sure he doted on me, and I'm sure that there was those things. I can imagine, because I knew the man, how he was with us, and I could see that. But also, I understand that he was dedicated as a provider to his family. I mean, like I said, he did not have a college education. Neither of my parents did. And he worked, every day. He worked 6 days a week. Well, 5 days if you count half a day on Wednesday and Saturday. But he worked 6 days of the week in the office as an insurance agent. And then he would come home, and depending on the day, he would go off and do something else after he'd eat dinner. He would come home for lunch, eat his lunch, go back to the office, come home, eat dinner, He would either be outside doing something around the house, he would be down at the farm with his brother, working on the farm, taking care of the animals, putting new roof on the barn, whatever, fixing equipment. He would be involved. He was involved with the Lions Club. He was a very active member in our community. He was on the municipal authority for 24 years. He, I mean, the football games for our high school on the weekends, both my high school and a sister Catholic school that used our facilities. The concessions were run by the Lions Club, and that was predominantly his position, his job. They built a new concession stand to add into, we were in a trailer for a while. There was a trailer you'd find at a fair or a street carnival or whatever, a hot dog stand. We had the same thing, and I used to work in there when I was a kid. I would sling cotton candy and sodas and popcorn from the trailer. But then eventually it fell apart, and they built an entirely new concession stand. I helped put shingles on that roof, and I was in college. So he was a very skilled tradesman, and he and my uncle, because they found it necessary to take care of the farm equipment in the cheapest way possible, meaning to do it themselves instead of hiring somebody to fix farm tractors and combines and all that stuff. They took classes in welding, and they learned to do all that stuff themselves. They would buy components, but they would do mainly the restoration and maintenance themselves, which was pretty impressive for someone with his life. But again, that took up a lot of his time, which meant he wasn't around me, so I didn't see him that often. I'd see him every day come home for dinner. We'd sit and we'd talk, but we didn't have the kinds of conversations that, say, a lot of people have. I've tried to sort of change that cycle a little bit with Bailey. But I looked up to the guy. I thought he was my hero, for the most part. And he had a very interesting personality. And I mean that in the nicest way possible. He was very charismatic. And when I graduated college, and I'm sure I was probably not the model of what a son should be in my father's eyes. My brother was very knowledgeable in mechanical stuff. My brother went to school started out as for engineering. I think he was mechanical engineering at one point, and then switched to computer science. Meanwhile, I was a theater major. I have a degree in theater arts, but I work in IT, so I did not use my degree for my job. I use my degree in my job, but I didn't get a job within my degree. I do this, or I have done T-shirts, or I have done acting, but not as a primary source of trade. I am an IT analyst by trade. And I learned that all myself. I didn't have any formal training in those things. So I guess I could say that in that way I am like my father, in that I had to learn by doing when it wasn't available to me otherwise. Or I just didn't take it as a trade. And that's been, that's been the way of my family. It's always like, make it work. Figure it out. Find a use for something. Don't throw away anything. My parents' house is like a hoarding nightmare in some ways, and I'm not looking forward to the eventuality of having to get rid of all that stuff, because there's so many things that are just from years gone by that'll never be used for anything. But my father wouldn't throw anything away. It was the generation they grew up in. Those grew up in the shadow of World War II. They didn't throw things away because they had an issue. You couldn't get those things. It wasn't because they were poor. It was because those things weren't available to you. And you have to understand that there were drives for rubber and for scrap metal and for things and during the war to help the effort to build the planes, to keep things on the ground, to keep the effort moving to press back against, the Nazis and everything else. And the people of those times didn't have access to those in their normal lives because they had to be used for the war effort. So anything that they had, they didn't throw away because they may need it. They may need it for something. And it's a generational thing you'll find for anybody that grew up in the 40s and into the 50s, that families like that tend to have those stuff lying around. I mean, that's where people, the American Pickers and all the other stuff comes from. But it's not like we had anything in our family that was worth anything. It was just all like usable parts for stuff. I mean, I keep a block of wood in my garage, and this block of wood is maybe it's a two by four, and it's maybe 5 inches long. But I've used it on several occasions for things because it just keeps becoming useful to me. And that's how my family was. And so, graduating college and going into the workforce, the first thing I ever had a job as was I was putting speakers onto rear projection large screen TVs for Sony in southwestern Pennsylvania when they had a plant there. I was a temporary worker. And I left that after about a month because I just couldn't handle that job. I felt I was taking that job from somebody else. I felt that I was taking that job from somebody who needed it more than I did. And I went to work as a bartender. And then as a banquet captain, then as a customer service rep, then as a knowledge and solutions specialist, then as a systems analyst, and then now as an incident manager. So that's been my track through life. And again, I had to learn all those things, but I'm sure that wasn't the case of my, what my parents had hoped that I would do. There's been several times where it's been wondered if any of us kids would take over the family business. It would be something that we would, do. And it's not exactly something we could have done the way the rules are set up, but it's something I'm sure that was thought about. And so I'm sure that, growing up in the shadow of that man, that I probably didn't come close to being anywhere near what he thought I was going to be. But he never said anything, and I don't know whether or not he chose to not say anything or he didn't have anything to say. I don't know. Because, once again, I did not know the man as well as I thought I did. It was kind of interesting how my relationships played out. There was a girl that I dated in high school we weren't right for each other. We thought we were, but we weren't right for each other. And after 2 years of dating into college, she was ready for marriage, and I didn't even know what I wanted to do. And there was no way I was going to propose to her and try to plan a wedding when I have no path forward yet. I mean, I'm still trying to figure my stuff out, man. And it took me, the next 10 to 20 years to figure that stuff out. But she wasn't having that, and it came to blows, emotionally and verbally, and we stopped seeing each other. And there was a joke made amongst my friends that had I married this girl, I would have disappeared from, my friends would have kidnapped me from the wedding. To which my father chirped up, "No, you would have disappeared from the bachelor party," which I thought was hilarious. Hilarious at the time. So, that was one of the insights I had into the guy's psyche, how he felt. Never really, showed any other interest in my personal life at that point. My brother and my sister both had children, and he was a grandparent through and through. And he he would come home from lunch, from work, he would come home for lunch from work, and my mom would be pretty much babysitting my nephews, and he would play with them for the hour, and then he'd go back to work. He would my parents were always babysitting grandchildren, and he was just a child with them. They played, they built things, they play with things. I never had that with the man growing up, but then again, he was constantly moving when I was a kid. He was constantly doing things. By the time he reached his 60s, he had a chance to, sort of put it into lower gear and enjoy those times. And, I kind of feel jealous of that in a way. So, when I got married, and had a child. And he was he would have been the same way with her, with Bailey. Because I lived so far away, I was the furthest of the three kids from our home base, as it were, my parents' house. My family didn't get to see Bailey that much. And that was partially because of distance, partially because just the situation as it was. And when that situation ended, I told my mom what had happened. I said to my mom, I said, we're getting a divorce. And she talked to me about it, and didn't say anything, didn't harbor any ill feelings towards either one of us over what had happened. She didn't have anything mean to say to anybody. My parents were very supportive of me, and they still feel that, they don't have any ill feelings towards Bailey's mother either. I mean, they don't. They still, they care about everybody. But I never told him about it. And we never had that conversation. We never had, at the time when things happened, my parents had just celebrated their 50th anniversary. And I had always thought that when I was going to marry, that I would marry once and it would be forever. Unfortunately, that didn't happen for whatever reason. And it wasn't that I couldn't have stayed married. I could have. I'm sure that we could have done the thing that most people do when of my parents' generation. But it wasn't right, and it wasn't the best thing for us. It wasn't the best thing for Bailey. We had to put that aside and say, in order for us to be the best possible parents for her, we needed to be apart. And then we could be that, And I approached the situation knowing what I grew up in, knowing what my relationship to my own father was. And as you can tell, Bailey and I have, telling you all these things for the last half an hour at this point, I think. Telling you all those things about how my family dynamic was and how things were with my own father. I think you can tell that the situation with Bailey was much, much different. Her and I had such a different dynamic. And we still do. We talk about those things that I never talked about with my father. We had those discussions. I have always made it a point to tell her things that were important for her to know about life and about things. And that's part of the thing about being the youngest in a family where your siblings are a decade older than you, and your family and your father and your parents are like an older generation, is that people, my peers, my friends whose parents are just now getting into their retirement years, they are closer in age, and they had a closer dynamic. I didn't, because there was a gap. I mean, there was a 30-year difference in age between my father and myself. 34 years to be exact. So there was definitely a difference in how our interactions were. And I've tried to, and the thing is that between myself and Bailey, there was a 32-year difference between the two of us. And I saw that as a challenge to not repeat history. And so we would have those talks, and we would have those interactions, and we would play, and she and I mean, there were times where I look back at some of my old photos and I see some of the things that we used to do when she was younger, and the dino tea parties, and the us building with her blocks these dino compounds and stuff, and having a massive Avengers Infinity War like battles between her My Little Ponies and dinosaurs and animals and all kinds of things, and just all the action figures that we had it was definitely a sight to behold, and it definitely tested the ability of me to come up with stuff on the fly and be imaginative to try to interact with a then 5-year-old or 6-year-old. So, that was how things worked up until about 2016. And then, you know, that's when we found out my father had cancer, had come back, and it was a different kind of cancer. It was a type of skin cancer that affected his throat and his tongue, and it was called squamous. And he just complained of having an ulcerated tongue, like you would get if you burned your mouth or something like that. And he had to have surgery, and probably the worst thing happened, and I'm not sure actually which one it was, but there were two things that were probably the worst thing that could have happened to my father. One was that he lost the ability to talk because the man could, I said, tell stories, and he had a very distinct voice and a very commanding presence. And the other thing is for him to stop moving. And unfortunately, after the surgery, he lost the ability to do both. The surgery itself, he had to have part of his tongue removed, and stubborn as he was, and he didn't do the things he was supposed to do, he never really regained the vocal abilities that he used to have. It was hard to, the man was half deaf. I'm half deaf. That's another thing we sort of share. But I couldn't understand, and sometimes it was harder to understand what he was saying because of his ability to enunciate with the damage to his throat and his tongue. And then when he had to go on chemotherapy and radiation, he lost the ability to move and be active as he was. I mean, up until the point where he had the surgery, he was out baling hay or putting a roof on a barn. He was actually physically doing work in his 70s and hadn't retired yet, right before he had surgery. That's to show you what kind of a man he was. And, after that, I mean, he was, for the most part, he was still there. And we had conversations. And we talked. And he did some things, but he didn't do it as much. And the drop off in his look and his abilities and stuff like that was severe from March of 2017 until July of 2000. I mean, within a year. Just not even that. From August of 2016, when we were at the beach, and there was a picture I constantly reference between the two of them. There's a picture of him standing in full-bodied. He was not skinny. He was, he put on some pounds in his age, and that's just him. My mom's cooking, and metabolism slowed down, whatever. But he was a bigger guy, and then to see him the following 4th of July at our family picnic at the farm and see how skinny and how frail he looked. And his hair, which was still, very salt and pepper. He still had a lot of pepper in that head of hair he had in when he had his surgery. But it was mostly all gray. There was a few streaks of dark among it. And, I mean, he held on to it longer than I did. I started getting gray hair before Bailey was born. But he didn't quite have the gift of gab that he used to have after the surgery and when he started to do chemotherapy. And this is going to be kind of hard for me to get through, and I'm going to try to plow through it as best I can, but like I said, we never talked. And there was a conversation that I'd never had with him before, ever. But I had gone to the house, and he was talking to me about something. I mean, like I said, let me. I need to preface this a little because it'll give me a chance to ramp up to it and get out of the being choked up a little bit. But he had, like I said, he never had a college degree, and he managed to put 3 kids through college without needing financial assistance or loans or anything like that on a one-income family. My mother was a homemaker by choice. My father was a single-income family, and we did that in the 80s and into the 90s. mostly the 90s. That's pretty extraordinary for these times, and I still haven't figured out how to crack that code yet, and do all those things. And I really don't know what they did to live like we did. Like I said, we didn't have a lot, but we never went without, and I didn't ever go hungry or bored. I mean, if I was bored, it was my own damn fault growing up. I had an Atari. I had a Nintendo that I bought myself with my own paper route money. I had a car, that was a hand-me-down. I mean, my family were considered to be, upper middle class at that point. Even but for my area, that's not saying a lot, but pretty good for having a one-income family. So, to understand that from that point of it, but him as a insurance man, I think he knew in the back of his head what was the most important thing to do, and he didn't just put money away into like a lot into savings or bonds or anything like that. He didn't have like an estate in that sense, but he was able to turn everything into a life insurance policy, and with that life insurance policy that he had, the few that he did have actually, he pretty much made it so that all three of us can put our kids through college without ever have to worry about it. That's how he set everything up. And I think that's extraordinary, and I don't know how I would ever do that myself, but not a financial wizard, but man, he really knew what to do, and he was smart about it. And so he was telling me about, I was at the house the one day, and he was telling me about this situation of saying, hey, you need to sign paperwork. He was, because he knew what he was heading into with chemotherapy, he knew that he didn't know how much time there was going to be. So, like, the conversation was never had, but I could pick up bits and pieces of what he was laying down in that sense. He entrusted his ownership, his half ownership of the farm with his brother, my uncle. He had entrusted that to the three of us, and let us have the choice of saying, if you want to keep it, fine. There's going to be taxes and insurance on it, but if you decide not to, then you get a payout from the ownership of it, what it's worth, and there you go. And I said, well, my only thing is I hope that there's always somebody from our family living on the property, and not we don't just sell it off and turn it into a housing development, because that would suck. It's 100 acres in rural Pennsylvania that I would hate to see get developed when it's such a beautiful area. So I'm spitballing. I'm spinning my wheels here just because. But we had that conversation about that, and he said, look, he said, you're not going to have to worry about putting Bailey through college. You know that, right? And then he looked at me and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, just take care of your mother. And that was probably the deepest conversation the two of us ever had about anything. That alone was it's something I'll never forget. It's going to haunt me the rest of my life. And I'm sure he had the same conversation with my brother and my sister. I'm sure that I wasn't the only one. It would be, egotistical for me to think that he entrusted my mother's care to me over the older, more experienced, logical siblings that I have. But I felt special in that moment. And with everything, going beyond there, and I'm not going to get into that, but debatable on how well that's going. But yeah, that was the last real conversation verbally that we had. Because after that, he had went into chemotherapy and radiation, and he lost the ability to really talk, and he didn't take care of things. pretty much his new normal was just surviving and existing and not getting better. He wasn't going to get better. He was just going to sit there in a state of, this is the new normal, and then it will be something different. And then, and the problem with that life is that you don't get better, you just maintain. And anytime you get knocked down, you don't get back up the same way. You get to another point of normalcy, and that's the new normal. And then it's you don't ever recover. You just sort of like stabilize, and then you drop, and then you stabilize, and you drop, and you stabilize until there's no way for you to maintain that existence anymore. And that's exactly what happened to him. So that was how that ended in November of 2018. My father passed away in a nursing home. And I really haven't gotten over it. But it's one of those situations where I don't know what to do about it. Now, if you ask people, they say, well, you need to deal with it. You need to grieve. I've grieved. I still grieve. I mean, there are times where I'm not okay. And I'm usually by myself when it happens. Usually I'm with Megan. And there's been a lot of times where she'll ask me what's wrong and I'll tell her, and then it'll just devolve into me, blubbering, and then I'm fine. And she's like, no, you need to let it out. It's like, I am letting it out. I don't want to keep letting it out because there's nowhere to go with it. It just sits there and it keeps happening, and it's like you're treading water. Well, the point of treading water is to be able to stay afloat. But the ultimate goal is to get out of that situation where you're no longer treading water. You get to dry land. And I want to get to dry land, so I stop treading water and move to where I'm stable again. But and that's the thing in my head. And I've seen a therapist because of this. And don't ever let anybody, this is a side note, but don't let anybody ever tell you that therapy is a bad thing or something you shouldn't admit or you should be ashamed of. God, no. Everybody should talk to a therapist. I am fully in agreement with, you should have someone to talk to in regards to personal issues or other issues between you and other people. You need somebody with professional skills to help you deal with those things. That is just a fact. It's not something that, it's the way we have stigmatized therapy and psychology and psychiatry it's just ridiculous. To talk to somebody. And that's what I'm doing now. But again, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm telling you this entirely long-winded ass, stupid story about me growing up and him and everybody else because I don't know what else I'm supposed to say. And I'm supposed to, if I get it out, maybe it won't be such a big thing anymore. Maybe I'll be able to okay with it. But it's the same story I've told either before to you as a viewer, to my family, to my daughter, to my fiance. I mean, it's not like this is an unknown story. I've told this a lot of times, and I don't think it keeps getting any better every time I tell it. But here I am, because I don't know how to deal with these things. I don't know how to get that grief processed and out of my system. Somebody asked me, well, why don't you deal with it? Well, what do you want me to do about it? I will. It'll come out. I'll do it. I'll go through that thing. I'll be in a mess for 6-7 minutes, maybe 10 minutes at most, and then look, I'm done with that. I have to keep doing something else. So maybe like my father, I keep moving. But the thing that really pisses me off about the entire situation is that maybe the person I need to tell this stuff to is the one person I can't. Because we never had those conversations. And we didn't have that type of relationship. And that's pretty much why I have not treated Bailey that way. And I think, in a sense, that sort of set me up for failure as a father. in that we had this dynamic that was somewhat of a friendship. I didn't treat her like a child. Treated her like a young person. I let her make decisions, and unfortunately, she will have, it's just not her. It's not her fault. It's just because the age that those decisions that she made weren't always the best decisions as far as things to do, and that led to me having to become the father figure. And then she didn't understand that. And I think that there's a reason why we don't get along in that aspect where it's like, listen, I'm your father. I'm telling you this because, and you need to because, and that's like, no, I don't understand that, and then we have an argument about it. And it's harder when you have someone in a blended relationship in order to do so. And I didn't stand up and be the person I needed to be, a father, and I didn't distance myself. And so they're like that. There's some damage to that relationship we need to fix. I just I don't want it to be I don't want it to be, long lasting. But in typical me fashion, chances are I'm going to screw that up because again, I don't deal with things. I put them off. And I've got way too many other things that require my attention, and I know that that's such a cop out because that's the important thing, my child, my relationship with my child and everything, and everything else is it may be important but it's not urgent, or it's urgent but it's not important. And I need to make time for those things. I need to not be unavailable like my own father was. So I've only half done what I need to do. And with Father's Day coming up, I don't know how I'll do it, but I'm going to try. And that's really the thing about it. I'm going to fail more times than I can count. And there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with failing. I mean, you can fail 100 times as long as you don't only try 100 times. Because on the 101st try, you could succeed. And even if you don't, you keep going. It's just like we do with video games. I have played so many games where I can't get past this level, I can't get past this boss, I can't get through this, I can't figure this puzzle out. And you keep trying because eventually you're going to get through it. Eventually you're going to learn something that's going to help you figure it out. You're going to learn a trick, you're going to learn a pattern, you're going to learn a technique. And that's really why we do these things. And that's the thing I've been trying to teach her through video games as well. So, I guess I should go do that. And I guess I should really stop worrying about what my father thought of me. Because I think if there was something wrong, unless he was more like me than I thought, he would have said something. I just wish I could tell him that. I just wish I could look out and see him in his like green Dickies pants with the boots and a dark blue short sleeve t-shirt that's just dirty from working, and a blue bandana are tied around his head, and his glasses half cocked on his face, and just look at him and say, I'm sorry. I love you. And I miss you terribly. Every day. And I'm sorry we couldn't fix it. I'm sorry we didn't have something in the garage that had been sitting there for 20 years that couldn't have solved the problem. And that's the thing that really makes me wonder is those are the questions I always wanted to ask him. Those are the conversations I wish I had. How, did you think about those things? Like, you spent your entire life working towards what? Towards what goal? You never got to really retire until you couldn't work anymore. Did you think about that? Did you want to retire? Did you want to stop and enjoy what you had built over the last 60, 70 years? Did you want to be able to sit back and let life happen around you and not have to just watch it, and you can actually be a part of it instead of doing something for other people? Did you kick yourself in the irony of all of that, of working so long as an insurance person only to, you know, have to be the single person that needed it the most? And, did you kick yourself and think, I never got rid of all that crap that we never really were going to ever use? It sat in the garage for decades. I could have, I couldn't do that. I couldn't move those things. I couldn't get rid of those things. And now you're stuck with it. And I'm sorry. Those are the conversations I wish I knew the answers to. Or the questions I wish I knew the answers to about him. Because those are the things that I wish we would have had that talk about. Those are those mysteries, those life's mysteries that I'll never find the answers to. I could ask my mom if she's able to answer those questions because she has a touch of dementia. I don't know if she's going to remember what day, the answers to those questions and what day I talked to her. It always depends on what kind of day it is, and that's the real sucky part about parents is that I lost one to cancer and I'm losing the other one who's still here. I mean, I'm 45. I'm 30 years out from this. I'm less than half of my life away from this. It's preparing me to not be like that. To dump the junk, to just get rid of all the crap in my life that I don't need, that I see on a daily basis that I'm like, why is this sitting here? What is that going to do? I'm never going to use that. Throw it out. If I need something, I'll go buy one. That's the real kick in the pants on this entire situation, is really put things into perspective. And that's why I'm not just trying to fix up this house. I actually bought a different one, and I want that one to be look in better shape. And I want to, I want to live. And I'm not worried about where the money is going to come from at that point. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, and hope, for the best. Because at the end of the day, I can't take it with me. It's not an life insurance policy for other people. Let's enjoy what we have now, because I may not get to retire like my old man. I want to be able to enjoy the life that I have with someone else instead of constantly working for something that may never arrive. I'm not going to do that. So yeah, I'm ending the cycle. I'm not going to play that game anymore. I just got to figure out how to make it work. Which I guess is kind of our motto, so. Once again, the lesson I needed taught, the skills I needed taught, I had to learn on my own based off of somebody else's failure to do so. And that just sums up everything, I guess. I've bored you long enough, and I'm tired, and I'm going to stop now. So I hope you have a great day. I hope all you fathers out there get all the crappy gifts you can endure. I hope you get to see your kids, and I hope that it's something you want, and that's something that they want, and I hope that those relationships are on good terms. And take care of yourself. And take care of your family. And have a good evening. Bye bye.